What band was never the same after losing a member? Avenged Sevenfold. They always were a band trying new things and switching their style up from album to album, but clearly when the Reverend died they had no idea how to get the most out of their band members' talents. The vocals were always the weakest part of the band demo, and that's the only thing that's stayed on par with their past material to the point that he's the only one pulling his weight. Gates doesn't shred anymore and the composition feels like bare bones mid-00s radio hard rock. Reverend was the soul of the band. When the Reverend died after the self-titled Avenged 7X album dropped, you could tell from the very next album how much influence he had on the songwriting in the band. Not to say they went immediately bad, but I really haven't vibed with anything they've released since. Sullivan was an amazing percussionist and innovative songwriter, and his absence would have been noticeable even if I hadn't known he was gone. My first thought was the Black Dahlia murder, but that remains to be seen. Trevor was a once-in-a-lifetime lyricist and had an insane voice. Brian has been doing an excellent job and I'm hyped for their first album with him on the mic, but there's no denying that there will always be a missing piece to their sound. Depression is a bitch, check on your friends. Blink-182. With Tom, there is a sort of goofy immature playfulness with some of their songs. With Matt Skiba, 182 was a little darker and more serious. I like both versions. Pin the Grenade is an all-time favorite of mine, but it's nice to see Tom back saying goofy shit like when I teach masturbation, I'm like just have fun with it. The Accused, when Tommy left it just wasn't the same. To me the Accused will always be Alex, blame Tommy. AC/DC Bon Scott was absolutely fantastic. Brian Johnson was great but he was not Bon. Van Halen David Lee Roth was emo, their only true vocalist. Sammy Hagar was okay I guess, but DLR vocals were iconic. Alt J with Will the bass player. They've done well without him but they lost a certain spark there that they don't quite have. I'm not sure how involved he was with their songs and it was album 1 so maybe it just happened to pair up, but it seems like he contributed something that hurt them all when he left. Years and Years. Singer sacked the full band and decided he would perform under the name Years and Years. So basically this answer sounds like the opposite of your question, but now good old Years and Years or Ollie has announced that he's gonna represent the UK at Eurovision next year. So, Metallica. Cliff was the only musician of the band. The others could absolutely crush it, but he was the soul. We likely wouldn't have had Justice due to their anger and grief, but we wouldn't have had Black Album everything else. It would be really interesting to see what could have been. Yes. As much as I still admire the now Steve Howe-led present-day group, without John Anderson's voice, the late, great Chris Squire's incredible bass playing and Rick Wakeman on keys and R.I.P. Alan White, their drummer for 50 years, it feels like a really good Yes tribute band. Avenged Sevenfold after losing the Reverend. They had very good albums, because he wrote a lot of their music. After that the new albums sound all the same and are just plain boring. The spark and upbeat is gone, and the vocals sound so whiny now. Third Eye Blind was the biggest rock pop band ever in 1997-1998 with an amazing first album that was co-written by their guitarist Kevin Cadogan. They fired him after the second album and sort of fizzled out into cheesiness and mediocrity. Evans Blue. They were unique enough with Kevin Madison as the frontman, until his ego got him fired. Unfortunately, the guy they replaced him with turned out to be a Breaking Benjamin clone. Not bad, but not particularly good. Lynyrd Skynyrd. I saw them on their first national tour opening for The Who and those guys were unbelievable. Saw them again after the plane crash, and they had definitely lost that sound that made them great. Fleetwood Mac. Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac is nothing Stevie Nicks' Fleetwood Mac. I'm a fan of both, but they sound nothing alike and I think they should have changed the band name after Peter Green's exit. Defiantly In Excess. After Michael Hutchence died, they should have folded. But instead they had a couple of stand-ins, then staged a ridiculous talent quest to find a lead singer. Fucking shameful. AC/DC, when Bob Scott died, their whole sound changed, and I didn't like it. Not that that should mean anything to anyone, I just like the Bon Scott sound and don't like the Brian Johnson sound. Pink Floyd. I don't think they got worse per se, but they drastically changed after the loss of Sydney Barrett and after Roger Waters left. I like all 3 iterations, but all 3 very different. Zeppelin. After losing Bonham and Deep Purple after losing Blackmore. I know some very good guitarists followed Blackmore, Steve Morse for one, but they just weren't the same for my tastes. The Beatles. Randolph Peter Best. The original drummer that was kicked out of the band just prior to them becoming famous. The band was never the same. It was better. Dillinger Escape Plan after Chris Penny left. Not to dig on the replacements, but that band is all about the drummer. He had a feel and chase that was hard to replicate. REM after drummer Bill Berry left. He was the one with the overdeveloped pop sensibility, apparently. They sounded like Coldplay trying to do Radiohead after Grateful Dead. Lots of members to choose from. Some changed for the better, some not so much. And by lots of members I mean 3 keyboardists and 1 guitar guy, Van Halen. The original lineup with David Lee Roth was the best and most entertaining, and most successful. It's a shame that drugs, booze and egos killed it. Pink Floyd after Roger Waters left. Don't get me wrong, they made good music from a momentary lapse of reason and but nothing like the Waters era. The Doors made 2 albums after Jim Morrison died. The Velvet Underground made an album after Lou Reed quit. No one really remembers those records. I would argue that there would have been more Beatles albums if John weren't murdered. There were already rumors of a reunion in the 80s. Def Leppard was never the same after Steve Clark died. He clearly was a huge part of their songwriting. The drop-off in quality was vast. One could argue that the Rolling Stones never truly recovered from Mick Taylor's departure. And it's not like Ronnie is chopped liver. Migos after Offset left, they broke up and Takeoff died few months after, but they would have been together if Sed was still in the group. Linkin Park. They didn't continue after, but just seeing the Love Me over 20 and Lost God, they could have been so popular even today. Bare Naked Ladies. Steve Page got arrested for cocaine, and then he left the band. I think it really screwed up the band's dynamic. Rush, for the better. Their first album was good, but after John Rutsey left and Neil Peart joined, they improved by a lot. Emarosa. I know Johnny Craig is a piece of shit, but I really just don't love anything they put out after he got booted off. Korn. Lost one of their guitarists and then their drummer. The guitarist eventually returned but just never was the same. The only Clash album after Mick Jones got fired was an embarrassing mess that finished the band. Cut the crap, indeed. Spice Girls. I'll bet $1 million the rest of the comments are about men in rock bands, but that's to be expected. For me it was Tristania when Viva Castana left the band. I knew it was a matter of time until the whole band dissolved. Queen. There can only be one Freddie Mercury. He was a candle in the wind. Queen did the soundtrack for Highlander. Stone Temple Pilots. I know they're still going, and more power to them and all that, but I miss Scott. Metallica post Burton not the same. Post Newsted not the same. Relax, I didn't say better or worse. Chicago after their guitarist died. They continue to this day but lost that genius songwriting. Joy Division. Quite literally, since they reformed as New Order shortly after Ian Curtis died. AC/DC. Though they probably actually turned out better with Brian Johnson over Bon Scott. Lynyrd Skynyrd never recovered from the 1977 plane crash and the loss of Ronnie Van Zant. For better or worse, Genesis after Peter Gabriel left became a radically different band. Blink-182, they kicked Scott out, and got Travis on drums. They went from worse to bad. The most true answer to this question is The Fall. It is also the least true answer. Blink-182. I know they're back together now. But back then they should have broken up. Nirvana, Jimi Hendrix Experience, As I Lay Dying, Linkin Park, The Crickets, etc. etc. The Beatles were never the same after Pete Best. Post didn't specify better or worse. Marilyn Manson. After Twiggy left it was never the same. Even after he came back. Motley Crue. Different when Vince was out, then without Tommy, now without Mick. Smaller band, but definitely Mute Math for the short time after Darren King left. Avenged Sevenfold. The Reverend was an insanely talented musician and songwriter. Van Halen without David Lee Roth is like a hamburger with no condiments. Genesis. Once Peter left and Phil took over vocals they got way better. 3 Days Grace is a shadow of its former self without Adam Gontier. AC/DC after losing Bon Scott. Different sound but still awesome. Chicago. After Terry Kath died, the band turned to soft rock. Cliff Burton was the special sauce. History will vindicate me. Scary Kids scaring kids. Amazing band still but not the same. You don't hear a ton about what Nirvana's up to these days. Genesis. Peter Gabriel took all the creativeness with them. Joy Division. Went on to reinvent themselves as New Order. The Clash just didn't matter after they fired Mick Jones. Led Zeppelin STP Randy Rhoads Sublime. Blind Melon. Metallica they were never the same after Cliff died. HET. All major bands that lost one or more members. Journey they're just a tribute band to themselves. Slipknot after the death of drummer Joey Jordison.